Hello, I'm Dr. Lisa Belisle, and you are listening to or watching Radio Maine. We appreciate your joining us today. I have with me in the studio artist Doug Caves. Thanks for coming in today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Lovely place.
Thank you. We are very intrigued by the work that you do, Doug, and specifically this piece that you brought in today, because it actually kind of reminds me of Maine, of the pastoral nature of Maine, the farming community. What's the name of this piece?
Well, this is called The Evening Before, and what it refers to is the evening before the mowing. So that's why those farm equipment pieces are sort of staged there. The rural aspect of New England, it just grabs me, you know, as we were talking earlier. I just have this affinity for the natural space, the outdoors, you know. I kind of feel that it understands me, and I understand it. And so I like being into it. And so this is the general feel, this image here, and this is one of my very favorite go-to places to paint. It's the general field is just below the Groton School in Groton, Mass. And so that's the prep school. Just below it, to the south of it, is the town of Air, but in between it is this general field. And when I first started painting this scene about 10 years ago, and this is an old painting of mine, but it was very rustic. The houses were rustic. They needed paint. They were empty, and the barns were empty. Not that they were still being used, but they were empty, and I just started painting, and I was just so fascinated because the light would come up from, well, the east would be like, we would be east of this, and then off to the west is Mount Wachusett, which was the tallest peak in the area. You know, small. I think it's 3,000 feet in elevation, The light just moved across there. It was so good, and I was just so fascinated by the way light will land on these old clapboard structures, and you know, and the foliage, you know. So that's what it's about. Yeah, I don't want to ramble, but you know, I try to get into the gush of the color of the, you know, the like transposing what you know about paint. Not transposing, but how to say, reconciling what you know about paint and application of paint, and then what nature is doing. I hate using that word, nature, but you know what your environment is doing and how it's reacting, that vibration between the two. So I'm always trying to understand what that vibration is, and that's what I'm trying to capture, if that makes any kind of sense at all. You know, sometimes it works, and sometimes you know, it's very elusive. But you know, yeah, I think I just wanted to paint the light in the window there, but that was it. You know,
oh, that's actually,
keep it simple.
Yeah. I mean, that is really interesting to look at that middle structure and that light, and to think that you could actually kind of create something around it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The surrounding is it's the environment that you're in. You know, I like architectural structures. I used to live down the Cape, and I would. In fact, I lived in Provincetown for a summer, and I loved walking in the side streets down there because these old clapboard, you know, houses that were the original house, and then the add-on, and then the add-on, and then the add-on, and then the shapes that they made as they tumbled down the street, and then the foliage would come into it. And I just so, you know, I just so connected with that. It resonated with me, and I always wanted to, figure out how to express that, and so I'm still trying to figure that out, So, but yeah.
I mean, hearing you speak, your words are, gushing and tumbling, and there's so much activity to your words, and so much of a sense of energy that comes out of the external environment, and your desire to use the tools that you have to put it onto a two-dimensional surface. I mean, you're trying to bring something that's multi-dimensional and translate it so that we have that to participate in, I guess. But that's such an interesting challenge.
Yeah. Wow, that's really well said. You should be my publicist. That's great. That's kind of how I feel about it. That's it's hard to put into words, but yes, I do instructional courses, sometimes online, sometimes in person. And so one of the themes I talk about that making a painting is sort of like conducting a symphony orchestra. Now, I have no musical ability whatsoever, but I love to listen to music, and I love the classical music, and so because the beginning painters, which is mostly who I instruct as beginning painters, you want to get in there, you want to finish the painting up in 2 minutes, And so I always talk about how it's bringing everything up, bringing the piccolos, bringing the strings, bringing the brass, bringing it all along, and then hearing the sounds, finding the balance, stop with the vague, and then move to the specific, So oftentimes, for me, that's a process of discovery. I don't know where the paintings will finally end up. I just sort of have, when I start, most of my work is done in the studio. I do work plein air whenever I can, but often I can't. And so over the years, most of my work is done in the studio. So it gives me this sort of, envelope, what's the word I'm thinking, a bubble that I can work in, where I can shut out that, the external, the delivery man, the passerby who wants to tell you about their uncle who painted, and all that stuff. And so it helps me to sort of hear the colors, if that makes any sense. So I liken it to that conducting, because you have to bring up all the issues, the color, the texture, the weight, line, just the basics, the elements of painting. And and I can just keep, every time I say "and," it means I'm like, what's the next thing I want to say? But I don't always want to say so. I don't say so much, lately, with the last few years, I really have been more introverted, more reclusive, and my wife sort of has to drag me out of the house a little bit. Not that I'm not crazy about it, but I'm just reluctant to venture out into society so much these days. So one of the things that is a result of that is where, for the last 7-10 years, most of my paintings have been landscapes or still lifes where there's nobody in them, and the streets are empty and the fields are empty. And now I'm bringing people into the picture, so I have this desire to understand, how that works with painting. And it takes me back to my teenage years, when one of my first heroes was Rembrandt, and I thought, gee, boy, if I could just paint like Rembrandt, how does, there's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, that symphony, that building up, that, that symphony of color. I thought that would be good. But then, other things come along, and, I lose focus. And in art school, I went to a school where my roommates and we were all in the art program, and we were dedicated, almost like cultists or something. We would go into class and hear the lecture on painting, and then we'd rush home and go to the studio and just, work all day and work all night until you ran out of steam, waiting for that next fix. We had a very inspiring painting teacher and a very wise, calm, understanding, helpful drawing teacher and sculpture teacher. And so those, I don't know why I went there, but I just, I think of them all the time, the lessons, and often they come back and like, what did he mean by that, And the painting teacher used to always say that you have to come down from up there to do art. you got to step down. And so I was always, what does he mean by that? What does that mean? I think I know what that means. You're sort of like in an elevated mental state or whatever, but to actually make the paintings, you got to step into the dirt, and you got to get your hands dirty and paint on your shoes and everything. So I was really good at that, getting paint on my shoes. But lately I've been thinking about, Vladimir Nabokov, his book, The Gift. So I've been thinking like that. I think that's what he's talking about. And so it's that passing through, you're passing through your existence, your life, your essence, who you are. You're living that out in this world. And, we really don't know anything. We're just like, we're just guessing all the time, and we're going on intuition. We're going on, the lessons that we learn from pain or from wise, counsel. And so that's kind of where my head's been at lately. It's like, well, I'm getting near the end now. This journey has been pretty interesting. Getting near the end. What are my last statements that I want to leave before I'm, off out of here, before I check out, So I think about that a lot. I think about that phases of life.
So if you're talking about your legacy, which it sounds like that's what you're describing.
Yeah, I guess that's an aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you?
You have to have a legacy to leave one, I suppose.
But that's what I was going to ask. So what is it that if somebody's coming along behind you and seeing the work that you've created, what do you hope that legacy will be?
Yeah. Gosh, that's a good question. I never thought of that. No one's ever asked me before. When I do instruction, I try to make two things really clear. The first one is I say, this is how I do it. It's not how you're going to do it, but this is how I approach it. And hopefully what you'll pick up is process and mental, the mental process to get from A to B, but also your process, the perseverance that you need. And then the second thing is when people say, "Oh, is this what you want me to do?" And I go like, "No, I don't want you to do anything except for what comes out of you." So that's, if anything, that's what I would want other painters who come after me, all the painters, that are serious about painting is traveling that path where you discover what's coming out of you, what your message is, and I don't know. I'm still looking for it, I'm sometimes, I think like art, painting is like magic, like computers are magic. For a while, I was really into relational databases, Microsoft Access, and just building them, making them do things, and the way you would connect disparate entities with a common entity. And I thought, geez, it's just fascinating how you can make all these things happen, and you can make, and you can pull up information, and then. So I think painting is sort of like that too, where you're trying to pull together different entities, finding what unites them, or like what their relationship is. What's the relationship of that color in the house to the background, to the mountain, and how does that work? And does it set up any kind of particular vibration or harmony? One of the favorite lessons I had in painting class was we used to have to get packs of Color Aid, which is this really nice paper, but it's like about 2,000 or 3,000 different colors. So you run from, if you take green, you'll have 50 or 100 shades of green. So we'd have problems like, and I forget who actually made this for these first lessons, but our painting teacher gave them to us, and I've forgotten. I'm terrible with remembering names. But you would do things like you'd have lessons where you would say you'd have one square here, different colors, and depending on what you put on the back of them, they look the same. Or you take two colors that are the same, putting something behind, different colors behind them to make them look different. And so that relational thing, and then the romantic side of making color sing, that's one of the things that always inspires me. Like when I start a new painting, is first I have to look at it and say, can I find the tune? Can I find the melody in this? Sometimes it doesn't happen, but then sometimes it's by surprise. You find that right, that right combination. So I know some painters will have an idea of what they're going to paint, and then they just paint it, and then that's it, and then they just throw it away. But my approach is more like, well, I'm going to have a relationship with this painting, with this canvas now for the next. Lately, it's more like a month or 2 months or 3 months, and I'm going to grow a little bit from it, and hopefully, I'll leave this object behind, which has some things that I want to look at in the future, and hopefully, other people will look at too. Yeah, boy, it seems like I'm just talking a lot.
Well, I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking about. We have especially in our culture, we're very individual focused, but that's not actually reality. None of us is standing out there in a field by ourselves. We're all only something in relationship to all of the elements around us. So it's kind of systems theory. It's this idea that it's the ecosystem. So I think what you're describing is not only how do all these things relate, but how do you optimize these things with relationship to painting? How do you optimize the colors? How do you optimize the shapes and the light? And how do you, as you said, make things sing?
Yeah. Right. It's the challenge of seeing if you can do it. I like to do paintings that I don't know how to do. Does that make sense? Like I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this or not, and that's part of the kick for me is to see if I can do it.
That's interesting too, because some people really want to drill down. They want simplicity. They want to know that they're going to be able to get from point A to point B. They're not motivated by that uncertainty that you're describing. But for you, the uncertainty is a driving force.
Yeah, it's the discovery that is the reward. So I think of it in terms of I think my days are in terms of exploration, discovery, and invention. So I try to start out each day with that exploration. Get a cup of coffee and go sit outside and just look at things for a while, just practice looking, and then it's like this, you discover, usually it doesn't take long, but something clicks, with that process of looking, and so then I'll go into the studio, and then I'm already sort of like in second gear, and then the discovery is, just getting in there, I love the physical aspect of painting. I've always have loved it. I love my being, but who I am. Like I am comfortable with fluids. If that makes sense, like pouring cement, making things. I just seem to know how. I know how to handle the viscosity of fluids. So you get an affinity for your materials, I guess is what I'm saying. And so I like working with hard things too, like lumber. I'm a bit of a carpenter, and last summer one of the things that I wanted to do when I finally left my day job was to rebuild this garage, the separate garages in my home, which is over 100 years old, and it had started rotting out in the last 10 years or so. So I did it, I did it all by myself. And and that was part of the thing, to do it, not to hire somebody, but to do it. And I was able to do it, now and then I want to do it again, but it's, it's like something I had to do, so I had to cross that bridge, cross that Rubicon, get that done. I felt bad because for the last 15 years I had neglected the roof, and so it had just, and a tree fell on it, and so I felt, that practical need to repair it, but it was also this sort of art thing where, like, well, the process of designing it, getting the rafters up. How do I get those up by myself? Stuff like that. I always find it amazing what humans can do when they have to do it, and so I keep hoping that eventually, as a culture and as a race, the human race, that will kind of figure out, there's some things that we have to pay attention to, and maybe we should stop putting our mind to it instead of living, instead of, widen our focus, broaden our horizons, that kind of thing.
What was your day job?
I was, through all my years, I had always worked. When I took a summer off from school, I started with a friend of mine painting houses. And after, a couple of houses, I was like, geez, I'm pretty good at this, I can make some money. And so I worked that kind of stuff all through my mid-20s or so. And, I was one of those guys that had a truck, and a painting crew, and I'd paint houses. But while I was doing that, I did a lot of new construction, and I observed all of the bones going up. So I taught myself how to be a carpenter and a mason and a tile guy and a plumber and an electrician, So now I know just enough to be really, really dangerous. So I ended up being in facilities management, started out in Worcester, Mass, as they hired me on as a painting contractor to paint some of their laboratories and whatnot, and then they liked me and I liked them, and they said, well, why don't you just work for us, And it was at the end of that building boom in the 80s, and things were, the building boom was coming to a close, and I said, yeah, I could use a change, so I did that. And then they paid for my, to finish up my bachelor's, and I went from, well, it ended up being in those, I try to say it in a pause. I ended up being a supervisor, and then later on I moved around and worked in Boston for a while, but becoming a facilities manager, which is making sure that all the lights are on and the toilets are flushing, and people are comfortable. And, so managing the trades, and so I did that for quite a while, and then there was a period where I just wasn't painting at all, because I was so into the facilities management thing, and I was taking courses in that as well, and so I find that I get lost in my challenges, and maybe I get too buried into them, but and I always thought, well, I've always had paintings, at least a couple of paintings a year, anyways, after school, and so I started to think about maybe 15 years ago that, well, I'm getting older and I'm not painting, I need to paint. And so I just did it, just got the paints out. And then I just started devoting every evening. So I had 2 jobs, and one was, the being the daycare for facilities, and then come home and paint into the evening. So I thought of it as my apprenticeship, and so that was very productive, but it was costly too, I didn't sleep much and whatnot, and so now I'm happy just to be painting, and I forgot where I was going with that. But,
what your day job was, and then what your evening job was.
Oh, yeah,
and
so
now...
the day job was managing people, and that, that has its interesting aspects to it.
But it's fascinating to hear you talk, because you have a very significant interest in the abstract and translating the abstract into the physical. And yet somehow you ended up in a very physical world for your day job. But then the people aspect on top of that, which is probably somewhere between abstract and physical, I would say.
Yes,
but
very abstract.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems like for you, you've always somehow kind of kept yourself up in the clouds somewhat, allowing your brain to make connections, but then also
You've been talking with my wife, haven't you?
but also the groundedness, also the looking up at the roof and saying, oh, I think I need to fix that. So that's an interesting thing for people to be, for someone to like you, to be so abstract, but also needing so much to be grounded.
Yeah. I agree with that assessment. I was told that once before. I was working in a shoe factory, one of the many jobs I had in my late teens. And I went from being this guy who was doing back part mold machine. So I'd take an upper, slip a piece of plastic in the heel, put the heel in this machine, pull a lever and it would form this back heel. I just did that 8 hours a day, And then I got a job as a parts room manager. And it's like, oh, so this is completely different. Only because I volunteered time to do some inventory, stuff like that. And then so, yeah, so I have this interest in how things are organized, how things relate to one another, and how they get prioritized, and how we prioritize as humans, because that's also constructed. And then, and then they brought in this guy from Maine who was a designer, pattern maker, designer, pattern maker, and they were teaching me how to do that. And that was really interesting. We would design shoes, and he was into designing these, we made boots, but he was into designing like women's fancy, shoes, with straps and no toes and all that stuff. So we were doing different things like that. And I had a great experience learning all this, but the guy had halitosis, and I had to sit this close to him. It was horrible. It was just really horrible. And I was still pretty young. I don't know if I was maybe early 20s or whatever, but I probably my teens. Anyhow, I just left. I said, I'm going back to school. And that's what I did. I got a job being a waiter, and I went to school, and and then so the owner of the factory, he saw me at the place where I was waiting, and he said, wow, he said that. He goes, you had an interesting combination of pragmatism and vision, or whatever word. I like the word vision, so I'll throw that in there. I thought that's interesting, I think it creates a dynamism. It creates a stress in me. Every day there's that stress, and I think that's important. It's part of how I get things done. Because without it, then what am I doing? Just sitting there reading a John Grisham novel or something. But so. I think about all of the influences. My grandfather was a painter, and my father was not. He was an engineer. And my father was, just, you're not going to be an artist. That's not going to happen, And I'm one of 4 boys, and I was next to the youngest. So I had to really, I had to think about that, and I thought about that for many, many years, many decades. And so I think one of the premises I had was, well, if you put the paints away and you put the canvas away, and you can do that and live with yourself and be comfortable, then you're not really a painter. So I tried it, and the paints came back. I just had to do it, So I thought, okay, well then, all right, I'm gonna be a painter, and so now I'm going to really develop. And then this is, like I said, about 15 years ago. And I said, well, okay, I know I'm not faking it. I'm not doing it because of the glamour, because of the money. I'm doing it because I need to, or I want to, anyways. So that's the. That's the play. I think I always for years I just didn't understand what was the point of making art. It's like Steve Martin's line. I felt like I had just enough philosophy to screw me up for about 20 years. I just didn't like. Is it just a selfish kind of pursuit? Because you really have to. You've got to push everybody out. When you're working, and and it's lonely in the studio. It's hours where you're just by yourself. So, you got to want to do all that, But like, why? What's the point? Does art make a difference? Does making art make a difference? Does poems really affect anybody? Does a good novel really, and I kind of said, well, yeah, it does. I kind of need that stuff, But I had such a hard time just getting over the training that was in my head that you're not going to do that, So because my father and my grandfather had a difficult, like any, I suppose, parents had, they had difficulties with although they reconciled toward the end. But so my father was very much opposed to that.
So you contained those within yourself. You embodied your father and his father. And for years, your whole life, it sounds like, those like
the tension
within you. I mean,
Yeah.
that's such a fascinating thing to know about yourself. And there's a poetic justice because now you're living back in the house that you grew up in.
Yeah,
So not only have
Yes,
you claimed yourself, but you went back and you claimed yourself within your own childhood.
Am I going to have to pay for these?
Well, I mean, it's
No, that's cool. I like that. I mean, those are themes I think about, like, that recycling or rechurning concepts, theories, ideas, just always returning them. Like, when I was a kid, I was always a great mimic, not as great as my nephew Drew, but who can mimic anybody in any language, and you just amaze me. But I was pretty good at mimicking Fess. What's his name? The guy who played Daniel Boone when I was in TV as a kid. Fess Parker. Yeah. I would feel like a persona, and sort of like take it on, 8 years old, whatever. And we lived in the country, and there was woods and farmlands around. So we were always, as kids, we'd get pushed out the door in the morning and come back when the street lights come on. And so I had this vivid imagination about for a time I thought I was Davy Crockett, because obviously we had the same initials. So I must have been the reincarnation of Davy Crockett, which meant I probably had a pretty bad end coming on my way, But I was convinced, and then I went through a Civil War period where I was just fascinated by the Civil War. And so I had a little Civil War out, uniform. I don't know what I am. I'm 8 years old, maybe. A little sword, plastic sword, and I'd be out there having battles all day long. And, so those were, and there, when I was growing up, there weren't children in my neighborhood. It was pretty rural. And so there was a boy younger than me next door, and a sister and his older sister who was my age. And so he ended up playing with his sister most of the time, so I ended up playing by myself, being forced to use, imagination, whatever. So when yeah, that's funny. I just, the imagination about, so the reason I brought all the mimicking up is because it's another way of getting into, like, understanding something is by taking it on. I suppose actors do that, it's a way of understanding the world or processing it.
And then the challenge, of course, is when do you leave off the mimicking and get back to that thing that you were describing before when you were talking about teaching? Where do you leave off what is important to embody and embrace and understand to come to your own place?
Nancy and I would just take a ride out in the hills when we would have that question thrown at us. I don't know.
Was that Ronald Reagan?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't do it anymore. But
Well, because a lot of people probably don't know what he sounds like, right?
Yeah,
but I do.
Yeah,
so
but
thank you.
I've lost my gift to be a good mimic, but I used to be able to do it pretty good. You know what, like Robin Williams, Jonathan Winters, they were some of my heroes when I was growing up. I used to love to watch Jonathan Winters on Johnny Carson. I'd sneak into my brother was away, my oldest brother, so I sneak into his bedroom at night and turn the TV on and watch Jonathan Winters. Watch Johnny Carson, and Jonathan Winters was on. And I thought, wow, he's so different from everybody else. He's just, it's stream of consciousness. He's out there. He's just pulling from here. He's pulling from there. And he's making it work somehow. He's making you connect with those unexpected relationships. And I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. And then Robin Williams was pretty wild at that. So I find that I used to find that just like mimicking a character was a way of expressing a well-rounded concept. It's like I don't know. I don't apologize. For this life I live. The Godfather. I did a whole speech in college once where I had to take speech class, but I'm really bad at giving a practice speech. I said, well, I'll never be able to do this, but I knew that I was able to mimic, so I just got up front of the class and did this like whole rendition with Marlon Brando's Godfather, and that worked out well for me. So again, it was like I didn't know if I could do it, but it's going to be fun to try it, What's the worst? I'll get a bad mark, But, so, I don't know. It just seems like everything, for me, comes to me from an oblique angle, or rather, I approach everything from an oblique angle. Like I wanted to be a painter, but I couldn't go from school to being a painter. I had to do all these other activities as well, But I always thought that, all of those other activities are part of what makes being an artist work. They're the elements of your process, where you're reaching out to this and reaching out to that, pulling in color, pulling in sound, pulling in comedy, irony, etc. So, I don't know. I just don't understand the world, but I'd like to, so I keep trying.
You and I are on the same page.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
It makes it kind of fun, doesn't it?
Well, it makes it interesting, right? I'm still curious. As to like, wow. Like, don't we live in interesting times today, Like, it's just incredible to me how well, I think we're just in such an upheaval, a whole. I guess, I think I'm speaking globally, but also from my experience within the country, where we're just so we've gone from having a kind of unified umbrella of thought of worldview to this just diverse and out to the ends. Instead of being on the top of the bell curve, now it seems like the ends, the bottom ends are where everybody is residing, on one end or the other. And I just kind of wished people would get back to being critical thinkers, be more reasonable, be kind, and so, kids, if you send me $5, I'm certainly not an evangelist or I'm not all that altruistic. I think I'm a pretty selfish person. I think, and insular, So, but there are some things, I think that need to be said, or at least observed, or at least stated. Like, like this is crazy. I think, our the turmoil that we find ourselves in, and if I think that we historically we're just we're in that historic place where things start to fall apart, and isn't that an interesting time to live in? Well, it sure is, because as systems and things start to fall apart, I guess there's more opportunities for humans to be human, or not, or or less so. So I don't know. I just hurts a little bit, Yeah. But if you send $5 to this address, what was the guy on Saturday Night Live? Al Franken. I used to love him. And he'd always, he'd give a little political speech, and then he said, "Send $5 in an envelope. You can send $5. You can staple it to a 2005 Porsche and send that to me, and that would be fine, But yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but
Well, I've enjoyed our conversation.
yeah, I get kind of antsy.
I've enjoyed speaking with you, and I appreciate your taking the time to come in and talk with us today.
Thank you for talking with me. Yeah, appreciate it. I'll have to send me a bill for the counseling.
No, there was no counseling. Observations only.
Yeah.
Well, I've been speaking with artist Doug Caves. If you'd like to see more of his work, it is at the Portland Art Gallery and on the Portland Art Gallery website. I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to kind of ponder the larger questions of the world and art. So thank you for doing that with me today, Doug.
Thanks for inviting me. My pleasure.